Hello, everyone, and welcome to Thorough Newspaper Analysis, which is brought to you by LawSikho. So, today we will be discussing two articles. The first article is from the Hindu newspaper, which is titled as The Limits of POCSO. Basically, this article talks about the various limitations which have been brought in the POCSO Act, which is the Prevention of Children from Sexual Offences Act, because of the various judgments recently that have come up from the Indian courts. The second article is from the Indian Express, which is titled as Center versus State in Delhi. Basically, this article talks about the power sharing or the power arguments that are going on recently and have also been going on from lately between the center and the Union Territory of Delhi. And thirdly, we have the News in Flash column. So before we move further, let's have a look at the Project Maverick, which is LawSikho's CLAT prep course. This course is very nominal and very amazingly drafted. The course is only for ₹100, so you can enroll for this course if you are preparing for this particular exam. Also, there is an important announcement for you all that from the next Monday, thorough newspaper analysis, both for Hindi and English, would not be available on LawSikho main channel, and thus please go and subscribe to our other channels, the sister channels, which are LawSikho Judiciary Test Prep channel, as well as LawSikho CLAT Prep, and also LawSikho Hindi channel. The links to all these three channels have been given in the description box below. Please make sure that you have subscribed and also hit the bell icon for the updates that we'll be putting on these channels. Now let's see what is the multiple choice question from yesterday's discussion. Kalia scheme for agricultural livelihood and income augmentation has been brought in which of the following states? Your options are Karnataka, Odisha, Maharashtra, or Haryana. This is the descriptive question for the day. What is POCSO Act? How can it be made more effective in protection of children from sexual offences? With this, let's start the discussion for our first article, which talks about POCSO and adolescent sexuality. Recently, a single bench of Madras High Court allowed a petition seeking to quash. By quashing here, we mean to put down or to bring to a halt a case of kidnap, aggravated penetrative sexual assault, and aggravated sexual assault of a minor. Now, obviously, even after having the provisions of the POCSO Act, which basically is the Protection of Children from Against Sexual Offences Act, still, what has been the reason that Madras High Court was able to quash or to put down this particular petition? Basically, here the judgment says, and the reasoning that has been brought in this judgment says that adolescence and young adulthood from a continuum. They form a continuum, and because of the physical, biological, neurological, and social changes during this time. So this particular judgment points out that when we talk about young adulthood and when we talk about adolescence, so they are in a form of transition, and they actually are a continued process due to the various commonhood activities that take place in the physical, biological, neurological, and social changes during this time. Now, as we know, the very particular age which we very generally call as the teen age is an age where there are a lot of changes that take place in the body, in the mental setup, the biological, neurological, and various types of changes in our social structure as well as the social environment that we have. And here, the court has reasoned that people within this age can be clubbed together with the 18 years old. Now, this is really something that we need to focus upon, because the very age of someone being called a child under the POCSO Act is a person below the age of 18 years. But here, this judgment of Madras High Court has kind of created a gray area wherein it says that the people who are adolescent can be put and clubbed together with the people of age of 18 years old. So here, definitely a gray area has been created as to who shall be given protection under POCSO Act and who shall not be. The court also says that the relationship of a minor victim with the accused is as being a loving one rather than an abusive one. So the court here said that in this particular case, wherein the court has put down this particular petition, the relationship between the accused and that of the minor victim was of a kind of a love affair, and that is why it was completely an individual call, and thus it was not at all an abusive one. And the conclusion here the Madras High Court has given is that this case can be quashed as it is purely individual in nature and would not affect any overriding public interest. So here, the Madras High Court has said that since the very nature of this particular case was individual in nature, thus it will not have any effect or any kind of overriding effect on the public interest, and so it was very much constitutional and very much right to put down this particular petition. Definitely, if we want to focus on this, we need to understand as to even if there was a kind of a love affair and there has been any kind of assault that has taken place, should that not be covered under POCSO? That is the matter what we need to think about. And thus, by bringing in up such kind of a judgment, Madras High Court has completely ignored the established precedents which have been brought by the Supreme Court in this particular direction of POCSO. This article basically has brought us to an effect to think about the various limitations of the POCSO Act that have come up in the recent days. Firstly, let's understand that what was the very purpose or what was the very object of bringing in the POCSO Act. So, in the first place, this act was enacted pursuant to Article 15 of the Constitution. Let's understand that what does Article 15 of the Constitution of India says. Article 15 Clause 3 provides that nothing shall prohibit the state from making any special provisions for women and children. And thus, using its power to make special provisions for children, the Parliament had come up with the POCSO Act. It brings in action the UN Convention on the Rights of Child to protect the children from sexual assault, sexual harassment, and pornography. Thus, no limits were set by the founding doctrines as well as the listed offenses. Now here, if we talk about the founding documents or the offenses that were listed, such limitations were not seen back then. But now, with the recent judgments, as the recent judgment that had come up of the Bombay High Court, wherein the Nagpur bench had said that it would not consider a particular kind of assault to be an assault until there was complete skin-to-skin contact. Basically, the assaulter had assaulted a minor girl just over her clothes, but had no contact with her skin. So definitely, this is a very, very narrow interpretation of POCSO Act, and thus it has brought up the various limitations of this particular act. Also, the Parliamentary Committee of POCSO Bill in 2011 criticized the clause providing for possibility of consent in cases of sexual intercourse with minors aged 16 to 18 years. And thus it said that here there should be no provision for, as in, considering the consent, any kind of assault with a minor that is aged between under the 18 years should be considered as sexual assault. Also, adolescent sexuality was not meant to be an exception. See, the very purpose why POCSO Act was brought in place was to make any kind of sexual assault or sexual harassment against children to be more stringent and to bring in harder punishments for such offenses. And that is why, in addition to the Indian Penal Code provisions, the POCSO was made to bring a more deterring effect to these offenses. And thus, it would completely be defeated if adolescent sexuality, like in this case of Madras High Court, are given any kind of exceptions, and thus it should be treated as no such exception and should be very much brought under the ambit of POCSO Act. Thus, let's see that what is the way forward of this particular judgment. The judgment has highlighted, firstly, the urgent need for a reconsideration of the absolutist approach of POCSO when it comes to sexual interactions of adolescents. Obviously, here we don't have to be so absolute in nature or in terms of the language of the law, because we should be considering that what was the purpose of that particular law. As we say that in the doctrine of pith and substance as well, the most important thing that needs to be considered is the purpose why that particular law was brought into force. And if at all, our interpretation is of such nature that it is defeating the complete purpose of bringing in that particular law, definitely there is no point and there is no justice being given to the victims. Secondly, the courts need to strike a balance between limited but developing capacity of adolescents to consent to sexual interaction and their vulnerability to being groomed, abused, and exploited. Now, obviously, when we talk about children that are from the age group of 16 to 18 years, many of them we consider that they are in the capacity to, give consent to any particular kind of sexual activity. But also, many a times, these people or these children are not giving any kind of consent voluntarily or by all their senses. Rather, many a times they are groomed, they're abused, exploited, and even misguided. That is why the courts need to strike a balance between considering this particular consent in such cases. Thirdly, there is a need for legislature to provide clarity on core wrongs that POCSO is meant to address, like what is the intent of the law and what is under the ambit of the law. And thus, we should always keep in mind the very purpose for which this particular law was brought into action, and only then we should be delivering the judgments in such particular cases. With this, let's discuss the second article for the day, which talks about center versus state in Delhi. So the center has introduced the bill called as Government of NCT, which is the National Capital Territory of Delhi Amendment Bill 2021 in Lok Sabha. Earlier, we had the Government of NCT of Delhi Act 1991, which provided that the powers of the assembly, discretionary powers enjoyed by the lieutenant governor, and the duties of the chief minister with respect to the need to furnish the information to the lieutenant governor. Now, to make some changes in these particular aspects, this particular new bill 2021 has been brought in Lok Sabha. So, as a general discussion here, the focus area of our discussion is that what changes have been brought in this relationship between center and the assembly or the powers given to Union Territory of Delhi. So, particularly, this bill of 2021 states, firstly, that the government in Delhi shall mean the lieutenant governor, which gives effect to the former Lieutenant Governor Najib Jung's 2015 assertion. Secondly, the Lieutenant Governor's opinion shall be obtained before the government takes any executive action based on decisions taken by the cabinet or any individual minister. Here, let's understand the very the purpose of and also the very structure of the Union Territory of Delhi, and what general relationship does this Union Territory of Delhi have with the center. So let me tell you that in India we have the center, which is the union, then we have the states, and also we have the union territories. What is the basic difference between the states and the union territories? So the basic difference here is that the states have their own assembly, they have their own legislature, they have their own state governments. But generally, the union territories fall directly under the control of the center. But due to various reasons, the three of the union territories, which are Delhi, Puducherry, and Jammu and Kashmir, have been given the power to have their own legislature, and that is the very reason that they have their own government and their own chief ministers as well. Just like in the case of Delhi, we have AAP government that is functional in Delhi. Also, we have Arvind Kejriwal as the chief minister of Delhi. But here, the one thing that we need to understand is that even after having its own legislature, its own government, as well as its own chief minister, these union territories like Delhi, Puducherry, and Jammu and Kashmir cannot function completely independent in an independent manner. And thus, there is still significant control of the center or the union over these three union territories. Now, what is that authority, or what is that particular link that actually connects the center and such union territories? So it is basically the lieutenant governor. Just like we have the governors in every other states, we have lieutenant governors in these three union territories of Delhi, Puducherry, and Jammu and Kashmir. That is why this particular bill, which is the Government of NCT of Delhi Amendment Bill 2021, which has recently been introduced in Lok Sabha, tries to give different and more powers to the Lieutenant Governor. And that is why this bill has the potential of changing the very relationship that is currently held between the center and Delhi. So as we just discussed, that the Lieutenant Governor's opinion, the bill says that the Lieutenant Governor's opinion shall be obtained before the government takes any executive action based on decisions taken by the cabinet or any individual minister. So here, if the government of Delhi, that is the AAP government executive, that is, it can be the CM, the deputy CM, and the other cabinet or other ministers over there, have to take any executive action. So before that, they will have to take the opinion of the Lieutenant Governor. The Lieutenant Governor, please note, is appointed by the center. So thus it will give a kind of indirect or direct control to the center in such matters of the executive actions in Delhi. Secondly, it says that it bars assembly or its committees from making rules to take up matters day to day of administration or inquiry. Now here it has also given, taken away very important power of the assembly or the committees of making any rules from day to day administration or inquiry. And thus this bill has been highly criticized by the government of Delhi because it will not be able to function very independently now on. if this particular bill is passed by both the houses and then also given the assent by the president. Let's also note the 2018 Supreme Court verdict in this direction, which stated by a five-judge bench that the lieutenant governor's concurrence is not required on issues other than police, public order, and land. So we should note that other than the police, public order, and land, other subjects of the list could be taken care of by the Assembly of Delhi. But for the matters for police, public order, and land, the lieutenant governor's opinion and his permission would be required. Then the Lieutenant Governor was bound by the aid and advice of the Council of Ministers. Now, this had actually shown a very good concurrence which was there between the Lieutenant Governor and the Council of Ministers, so that a coherent decision can be brought up. And thus it said that the status of Lieutenant Governor of Delhi is not that of a governor like that we have in the other states. Rather, he remains an administrator in a limited sense. So thus the powers of administration of the Lieutenant Governor shall be limited as compared to the governors in the other states. But let's see that what does this bill have particularly in future for the center and the Delhi relationships. Here also, this says that the bill proposes various other things like before taking any executive action, we just discussed the permission or the opinion of the Lieutenant Governor shall be taken by a general or a special order. Then here it has been completely brought down, and also it has been completely criticized by the Delhi government, obviously because it will be curtailing the powers of the Delhi government. With this, finally, let's see what do we have for news in flash today. Firstly, US is now India's biggest oil suppliers. So earlier, Iraq continued to be the top oil seller to India despite a 23% decline in purchases to a 5-month low of 8,67,500 BPD. But recently, US has become the largest exporter to basically India imports the largest amount of its energy needs or oil supplies from US now. The second one, bee fences to ward off elephant attacks. So here a very new and innovative method has been used by in Karnataka to actually make sure that there are least of the elephant and human attacks. Recently, we have noted that in the man-animal conflict in the areas of Kerala and Karnataka, there were huge conflicts between the elephant and the humans. And thus, to avoid this in the coming future, Project Rehab, which is REHAB, has been launched by Karnataka. Particularly, this project Rehab stands for Reducing Elephant-Human Attacks Using Bees, which actually intends to create bee fences. So what will they be doing? They will be keeping the bee boxes around the areas of the fields or the forest, and thus it will be able to thwart or keep away the elephant attacks in human habitations using honeybees. So generally, we should know that elephants are they're a bit scared of the honeybees, and thus they do not want to enter areas wherein the honeybees are active. And thus this will actually keep them aloof from such areas, and ultimately the conflict or the interaction, such kind of unwanted interaction between the elephants and humans shall be prevented. So this was all for the day. We hope it was a good session for you. Thank you so much for staying tuned with LawSikho.